Christopher Hitchens, Washington correspondent with The Nation. You write a column for them every 2 weeks. There are lots and lots of TV talk shows that news junkies can watch to get information or hear analysis. What do you think of these talk shows?
Or to watch their friends, or to see how the press sort of massages itself in a narcissistic manner. I wrote a piece about it recently for Harper's Magazine, saying that really the level now of TV discussion of ideas and politics has become humiliatingly low, that it's the province of a very small, what I call repertory company of pundits, who take themselves far too seriously, take each other far too seriously, and are taken by too many viewers more seriously than they deserve, because these programs are very light-minded, very frivolous. Usually they're contrived, though they pretend not to be. The fix is in, the built-in limits to what's going to be said or can be said. And that it's, I suggest towards the end of my piece, it's maybe for this reason that the culture of journalism in Washington has become so sycophantic that the president didn't have a really tough press conference until he was 6 years into his presidency, and when the country was entering a tremendous crisis. Only then did he start getting tough questions.
This is the article that appears in a recent issue of Harper's, and you call it Blab Scam, or an editor might have given it that. Did you call it this, or did some editor give it that title?
I must say, I think it was Louis Lapham, the editor. It's a clever one. I'd like to claim credit for it.
Blab Scam, TV's rigged political talk shows by you, Christopher Hitchens. Blab Scam suggests a scandal. Is it really a scandal?
Yeah, I think it's a scandal, and I think it's a crying shame. I mean, I've been now on the McLaughlin group, which probably some of your customers watch too, on It's Your Business, on most of these shows. And the only one you may be touched to see, I don't mention, as being a fix, is this show. And I guess I could have also mentioned Firing Line, which I've been on, William Buckley's program, which again I wouldn't include. I mean, in both these shows, if you walk off the set and you think, damn, I wish I'd been able to say this, or I wish I'd remembered to say that, it's your own fault. You had the chance to. With the others, it's all heavily confined, occasions for the chairman to show off, usually, and unspoken agreement among the participants that certain awkward things won't get mentioned at all. And so people are just really role-playing.
Now, for your appearance on C-SPAN this morning, you get one of these handsome mugs we're drinking coffee out of this morning. Do you get paid for the other shows, the other talk shows around Washington?
McLaughlin pays.
What do they pay? How much?
I can't remember. I think if you're a regular, it's about $500 a shot. I think I got $350 as a guest. The other ones don't. I mean, the other ones, I think most journalists would pay to go on, because you're taken very seriously if you're seen, you know, asking a toadying question to the Secretary of State on one of the Sunday morning shows. That sort of enhances your marketability. What is in it for journalists is a tremendous increase in the rate they can charge for public speaking. If you're on the Brinkley show or something, then you'll get a call from the League of Women Flower Arrangers in Des Moines. And you can, instead of accepting their $500, you can say, well, I don't usually get out of bed for more than, for less than $2 grand. And the marketability goes up in that way. TV really helps you out.
Let's talk about the 3 shows that are so widely watched on Sunday mornings. And I'm sure C-SPAN viewers that read lots of newspapers probably watch those shows. I must admit I do. And I'm going to hold up your article from Harper's, Dateline Washington. An interesting story about how these shows are put together and how these shows consistently get top government officials. Dateline Washington, in the White House press office, there sits a woman named Denny E. Brisley. You may not know Ms. Brisley, but if you watch the Sunday morning political chat shows, you know her work. To her falls the job of producing and editing the key segments of This Week with David Brinkley, Meet the Press, and Face the Nation. Now, how is it that a White House official edits the key segments of those 3 shows?
The White House can decide who they're going to put up in a given week, and they can tell administration officials not to go on the air that day, and they can tell others they should go forward and carry the torch for the line of the week, whatever it may be, because it now keeps changing so often. This week, they can then get the 3 shows to bid against each other for whoever is the most famous or prominent administration spokesman that week. And what that means is that these shows are not going to have you and me, critical, independent minds as we are, when the White House rings up, they say, well, so you'd like Mr. McFarlane, say, and they say yes. And he said, well, you know, CBS is looking for him too. Let me see, well, what questions were you thinking of asking him? You know, who was going to be the panel? And producers can learn quite quickly, you're not going to make trouble for the guy. Otherwise, you'll always be at the end of the totem pole that week. So that what looks like competition between the three networks is in fact a competition to please and to be bland, and not to outbid for getting the story, but outbid for getting the ratings building figure. Now, I say that is a scam in the sense of it is corruption of journalism, yeah, and it is the reason why the administration has been able to have such a tremendously easy ride over the last 6 years. And I say that, of course, as a political opponent of the administration, but I think it's not in the interests of people who support the administration to have it go uncriticized. It's bad for it, and it's bad for our trade of journalism too. So that's really the essence of what I'm saying. And I remember one of those producers of one of those shows, I won't say which one, saying to me, I'm sick of having Larry Speaks being the chief producer of the Sunday morning TV in this country. And that's really what the situation was.
In Utah-it, and you interviewed Miss Brisley, is that correct?
No, I didn't interview Miss Brisley. The nation is incredibly low in the administration's scale of priorities when it comes to giving interviews. We're never called at press conferences. They never call us back. I mean, that kind of thing. No, but those words are direct quotes that she gave to a friend of mine.
The quotes from Ms. Brisley to your friend basically saying, it's all done in a very sensitive diplomatic type language. Things are said but not said. End of quote. Among the things, quote, said, end of quote, in this unspoken dialogue is something along these lines. Quote, don't even think about having X on the panel of questioners, or we'll go to another network with the secretary and you'll look small. Yeah. So they even do it with journalists that might be asking tough questions of a member of the cabinet.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very small pool of people. I mean, look, it's like when, I remember, I think it was the night of the bombing of Libya, a moment of extreme controversy in American life, public life, and in American relations with the rest of the world. You know, Nightline calls up its list of impartial experts, and these are always the same people, Henry Kissinger, sometimes Jeane Kirkpatrick, until very recently Michael Ledeen, who turns out to have been a man who was an expert on terrorism only in the sense of being a man bargaining with terrorists and swapping hostages for weapons with terrorists, was unabashedly on the television every week as NSC terrorism expert. So the definition of expert that they had was A, very narrow, and B, one that generally fit the government's perspective on the issue. So that one had a tremendously conformist sense of politics and of debate, transmitted to millions of homes without anyone really knowing the name of this woman in the White House press office, Denny Brisley, whose job it is to keep the thing smooth and prevent any rough questions or rough questioners from breaking it.
Is it possible for Miss Denny Brisley or someone in the White House or in the White House press office to keep a critic of the Reagan administration off the shows by simply saying, if you have them on, we won't give you the secretary, and we will give the secretary to your competitor?
As I say, and as she says, it's done in a sensitive diplomatic manner. After a while, I mean, any producer who's got any sense of himself at all will know what not to do without being told. Let's put it like that.
Let's take a look at who was on the TV talk shows last week. They do get a lot of publicity, and I'm looking at Monday's USA Today, and there's a little story they have right here in the fold. Excuse me, I should have ironed this first. In the TV talk section, it says that Henry Kissinger and Cyrus Vance, fresh from visiting Mikhail Gorbachev, say Soviets are serious about arms control. They were on Meet the Press. And then Secretary of State George Shultz was on ABC's This Week with David Brinkley. And then Iran ambassador to the United Nations denied on CBS Face the Nation that Iran is backing the religious extremists. So let's look at some of the people who were on. Also was Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat of Georgia, talking about the President's Strategic Defense Initiative. How effective are these for whether you're a Democrat like a Senator Sam Nunn or a Republican like Secretary of State Shultz? How effective are these Sunday morning talk shows for getting your message out, getting your message to the people?
Well, I think for getting the message out, they're reasonably good because, on the whole, the programs are tribunes for these characters. I mean, they are asked questions in a very respectful tone of voice. They are asked, Senator, what's your opinion on this? Can you tell us more about that? It's all done in an extremely polite way, and yet you still have the administration claiming that it has an adversary relationship with the media. More important, though, I think, is name recognition. You know, if you're on there, it means that you've been, in a sense, mentioned. You've caught the eye of the people who make and break reputations in Washington. And that's also true, of course, if you're invited on to be a questioner. That's a sign that you've entered a certain sanctum of a certain club. People inside these clubs, on the whole, are not interested in letting in any fresh air or any noise from the street.
You also go on in your article, Blab Scam in Harper's, to talk about the McLaughlin Group, which you call McLaughlin,
The McLaughlin, yes.
McLaughlin. Why do you call it that? Why do you say that?
Because the McLaughlin is an unserious show, a sort of polecat shouting and screaming match between people who pretend to be representing opposing opinions, who in fact share most of the assumptions, are close personal friends and colleagues, and put on a show really for suckers, as if they're Washington insiders having a knockdown, drag-out fight. And I think probably some people think that's what they're getting when they watch it, and they're not.
It's not an unrehearsed
By no means unrehearsed, no. I mean, it advertises itself as unrehearsed, but one is put through quite an intensive course of preparation when one is a guest or participant in the show.
This is an advertisement in New Republic, and you may have seen it, it's called Spontaneous Combustion, and it's about the McLaughlin Group, it's a little advertisement. You would say that spontaneous combustion is not a very accurate term?
It's certainly not. I don't think it's very combustible, but it's certainly not spontaneous. No.
Let's talk about the people you've appeared on this program and the people who appear in this, and many of our viewers familiar with it. What do you think of some of these people? Robert Novak, starting off from the side.
Well, Robert Novak is a shill for the administration. I mean, his column, which is syndicated in quite a number of papers, is simply the dog biscuits and scraps that are thrown to him by Reaganites, sometimes to leak against each other, sometimes to leak against the Democrats or Congress or the press, and he just shoves it in and passes it on. He's a conduit, really, that's all.
What about Morton Conrad?
And pretending to be a fearless, investigative, you know, don't tread on me type. Don't believe a word of it.
What about Morton Kondracki?
Morton Kondracki is, I would say, your classic liberal, ambitious defector. I mean, the guy who says, I used to be liberal, but now I've seen the light, and I'm very much more grown up now. I'm much more grown up than I look, for a start, and much cleverer than I look, too, and sound. And I've been through these fires of conversion, and now I've seen that absolutely this is the way it ought to be. You know, you should have people like Ronald Reagan in charge, and I can't think why I didn't see it before. Still, as it were, selling the shreds of his liberal past. That's an old game, too.
How did
to
you
hear him talk, you'd think he was the first person ever to have thought of it.
When you were on the McLaughlin Group, how are you prepared? What happened before you went on, after?
Well, you get prepared first by the host himself, long chat, sounding you out, you know, what do you think about this, what do you think about that? Then, if it's going to be that Sunday, you get a long telephone call from one of his staffers saying, look, these are going to be the topics. At least, this is Thursday, this is what the topics are going to be, they may change. This is the order in which they'll come to you and ask you your question. When you cue out, he's going to go to Mort. So be ready to do it in that order. Then it'll be the reverse order on the next question, and the next question will be South Korea. Now, on the morning of the taping, they call you and go through all that again, usually with some changes, because there's almost always something in that day's papers that they want to put in. So you go through it again, what the questions will be, what the topics, and in which order you'll be asked them. Then you sit in your chair, and the lights go up, and they say, a spontaneous, unrehearsed show. And I remember thinking, geez, as I sat in my chair, that's a bit much. And that's only an extreme example, I think, of the way in which this clubland conception of politics dominates most of the TV shows.
You also, in your article, Blab Scam, talk about CNN's show Crossfire, another vigorous exchange of ideas and issues. And you talk about Robert Novak, and you say here that one of the producers told you to go easy on Bob Novak that evening or bid farewell to Crossfire.
That's right, yeah.
What took place in that?
In fact, I was on, the other host on Crossfire is a man called Tom Braden, who is allegedly a liberal. Actually, he's about as liberal as Sam Nunn is, I would say. he's certainly not as liberal on his wing as Novak is conservative on his. But for a couple of evenings, he was unwell. So I was promoted from being a guest to a guest host. So I sat in the opposite chair and I helped to co-host the program. And Novak, as you know if you've seen him, is a man with poisonously bad manners and likes to get other people to lose their temper and can dish it out but can't take it. So I tried to repay him in his own coin one evening as a co-host. And when I came in the next day, they said, look, if you don't give an undertaking not to do that again, you're out because he won't come on with you. Now, I wrote to Ted Turner, who runs the network, and I said, look, is it by your wish or with your knowledge that one of the participants in this alleged argument every night is also the umpire, the referee? Because that is not how the show advertises itself. Crossfire means no holds barred, right? Got a reply, rather evasive one, from Turner's brother. My phone stopped ringing from that studio. I don't want to make myself out to be the guy who's too hot for TV, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here. But I'm saying, actually, it doesn't take very much for them to say, no, he's outside the brackets of what's acceptable. This is all, making us uncomfortable. Let's go back to the people we know and the viewers are comfortable with. Let's still call it Crossfire, but let's make sure that actually the gloves are right on all the time.
You obviously have a heavy British accent or a light one, pleasant British accent, whatever. What's it like in England? Are there shows like this, and are they pre-arranged and choreographed as you've described these, or are they true Crossfires and true McLaughlin groups? Choreography
is a good word. Well, I haven't, though I was born in Britain, I haven't lived there for a long time now. I'm not sure I can give you all that good of an answer. There is a very, what you might call, respectable overlay to everything in Britain, and especially with the BBC, they're fairly careful. But you do have in Britain a more parliamentary tradition, and that's reflected in the television shows. I mean, Margaret Thatcher has to go to the House of Commons twice a week and for half an hour answer any question thrown at her without any preparation, and be booed if she gives a bad answer. Very good discipline for a politician. I don't believe Reagan could do it for a day, for example. And that tradition is carried over a bit into our press conferences, which are not fixed, as the White House one is. There isn't a seating plan. There isn't a map on, as there is on Reagan's podium, so he can go to people in prearranged order, all that, which people don't see when they watch them.
European press rude and surly in comparison to what you see of the American press corps at the White House news conference?
Yeah, the trade-off for that is, of course, that most of the European press are owned by very boldly declared political interests. I mean, they don't pretend to be objective. At least in this country there is a culture of objectivity, a pretense of it. I mean, I think it makes for boring journalism and sometimes dishonest, but there is the ambition, at least, to be fair.
Good morning and welcome to our program. Today we're going to talk about talk shows, call-in shows like this one, if you will, as well as any of the rest that you see on the cable dial. And joining us this morning to do that is a gentleman who's a veteran of just about all of these programs. His name is Christopher Hitchens. He's a Washington correspondent with The Nation. He writes a column for them every 2 weeks. He's been with them since '78, been in Washington since '81. He also is a Washington correspondent for The Spectator, based in London, and he writes a column on the American scene for the London Times Literary Supplement. Prior to that, he worked as foreign editor of the New Statesman, author of a book called Cyprus about that country. He is a graduate of Liss School in Cambridge and also a graduate in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, graduating '70, married with one child and originally from Portsmouth, Hampshire, England. Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. If you like or don't like talk shows, this is your chance to get in your 2 cents, and you can use the numbers that will appear there at the bottom of your screen. Reston, Virginia, good morning. Go ahead, please. Reston, Virginia, are you with us? No, Reston, Virginia. Give us a call back and we'll get you on the air just as quickly as we can. If you joined us a little late, we're talking about a new scandal in Washington, one that's written about by Christopher Hitchens, and he calls it Blab Scam, and talking about the talk show programs. And if you have a question on how they're put together, what's said and what's not said in arranging these things, that's what the program is about. What are the, you're a journalist, you write about a wide variety of topics. Besides TV talk shows, what else have you been writing about?
Well, in the column that I write for The Nation, I've been, partly because one has to be, but partly because it's been a long-term interest of mine and of the magazines, following the influence of covert war and secret government in foreign policy on American democracy, which has been the story. Everyone thinks that's been the story for the last 3 months. I would claim for the nation we thought it was a story rather longer ago. None of the revelations about the illegal help to the Contras would have come as a surprise to our readers. We've been writing about the attempt to circumvent Congress on the Nicaraguan question for a long, long time. We broke a lot of that stuff. The only thing that was new, of course, was we didn't know it was the Ayatollah's money that the administration was giving them. But I would say we were ahead of the pack on that by some considerable distance.
In today's news...
They don't pay me to say that, by the way.
They don't pay you to say that. Tell us something about The Nation, since you write once every 2 weeks. What kind of magazine is this? What kind of magazine is
The Nation is the oldest political weekly magazine in the US. It was founded in 1865 by a group of abolitionists. And it's always taken the liberal line. Some would say the left or the radical line. I wouldn't mind either of those accusations.
Liberal, conservative?
Ever since.
What kind of magazine?
Well, as I say, founded by abolitionists, always been liberal, radical, or left, depending on how you like to call it. Radical, I would say. Ever since, for 120 years, 121 nearly. And we hope to continue to uphold that great tradition of American dissent and radicalism.
Let's take a look at today's newspaper. This is today's New York Times, Tuesday, February 10th, and a picture of Robert C. McFarlane, and underneath it the caption says, "Felled by Valium, Robert C. McFarlane, former National Security Advisor, was hospitalized after taking overdosed." Any reaction?
From me?
From you?
I don't think he was felled by Valium. I think it's clear he was felled by his own hand. I don't want to be unkind about the guy, but you don't take a large amount of Valium for any purpose 2 hours before you're going to testify in a very important congressional inquiry. Whether he hoped to take his own life or not, I wouldn't obviously care to speculate.
This is the Washington Post front page. McFarlane takes drug overdose. Iran probe figure hospitalized shortly before testimony due. And as I understand it, he was to testify before the Tower Commission, which former Secretary of State Ed Muskie, former Senator John Tower, heading up that commission. What do you think of that specific commission investigating the role of the National Security Council?
Well, I think it's a little heavy with trusted establishment figures, but I think that its sole value so far is that it's been able to get the President to come and talk to it, though it hasn't been brave enough to tell us what he said. He still seems to regard his knowledge of the affair as some kind of private property, and that's why I think that, this McFarlane episode isn't the only indication of extreme alarm within the administration about this inquiry. We don't know what it is they're terrified of coming out next, but obviously there is something they worry about very greatly. I can speculate what I think it is, which is the involvement of the Contras in narcotic smuggling. I think that is what's terrifying them.
How long do you think
if you ask me to guess, because that wouldn't be forgiven by the public in the way that dealing with terrorists has been a bit forgiven, because they think, well, it's a hard old world out there. When they find that these riffraff, the Contras, for whom Congress was circumvented and the Constitution was trampled, are a bunch of narcotics dealers, which is going to come out very soon, then I think there really will be a row. I think this may be what is causing such a panic.
Now, last summer on the floor of the House of Representatives during debate over whether or not to fund the Contras, this came up. This was an issue brought up in debate. How long do you think people like Bud McFarlane have known about this?
I think anyone who's wanted to know has known without any special information, without the special information that comes from being former National Security Advisor and confidant of the President for a long time. If you wanted to know that the Contras are involved in death squad work, in contract killing, in narcotic smuggling and the rest of it, as well as the usual quota of rape and mutilation, you've known. It's all been on the record. The extent of it and the intensity of it, I think, maybe isn't fully understood yet. And we don't know also if it was actually financed by money given to them by the administration. But I think that is what's going to emerge.
I want to hold up yesterday's New York Times. One of the questions involved in all this, mostly dealing with the 1988 presidential race, is the Vice President George Bush. And Monday's New York Times is a story by Gerald Boyd. Bush aides widen dispute over Iran. How badly is this whole situation and the coverage it's received hurt George Bush's chances of being the next president of the United States?
Well, it should have destroyed them, because the memo that is now published of his meeting on the 29th of July in Jerusalem with Amiram Nir of the Israeli government says, signed by his own chief of staff, that Nir told him, we've dumped the moderates in Iran. We're going to do business with the extremists only, with the ultras, because they're the ones from whom you get results. That's, in the words of Bush's own chief of staff, the record of a meeting between Bush and an Israeli leader in July, before the president began lying to us and saying we were only dealing with moderates. Reagan cannot now come before the cameras and say, Bush knew more than I did. A president can't say that about his vice president. So he can't this time pretend he didn't know. It was always a deal with the hardliners. It was always arms for hostages. And it was always intended that the money went to support an illegal war in Nicaragua. All that this memo shows is they knew all that in July at the latest. So that everything that's been said since Poindexter resigned by the administration has been consciously untrue. Consciously untrue. That is, I would call that a political scandal.
Our guest is Christopher Hitchens, Washington correspondent with The Nation, writes a column for them every 2 weeks, and does a lot of other writing for a lot of other publications, both here and abroad. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to use the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Indianapolis, Indiana, good morning. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Carl.
Good morning.
Good morning to your guest. I've seen
Morning.
him on other shows, and I admire him as much as I admire the country that he's from. I would like to make kind of an off-the-wall comment about this McFarland suicide attempt, and maybe you're indirectly related to the subject matter of your show about talk shows. All those talk shows that Bud McFarland appeared on, I wonder if he was ever under the influence of Valium. This suicide attempt looks very bad in the face of Ronnie and Nancy's campaign, the Just Say No campaign against drugs. Reagan gets on TV and tells Americans to just say no to drugs, and then his cabinet and who knows who all else, as soon as they get under a little stress, they head for the Valium bottle or the whiskey decanter. Valium is an extremely powerful drug created in the laboratories and is very accessible. You can get higher on Valium than you ever could on marijuana. No one ever committed suicide on marijuana. And I just think that it's very hypocritical, another example of hypocrisy. I wonder if Valium shows up in a urine test. Was McFarland given a urine test?
Caller, if I can ask you a question now that we've gotten your comment on that. We started the show by talking about Blab Scam, as the article is entitled that our guest has written. What do you think of some of the talk shows? Have you ever watched McLaughlin Group? What do you think of it?
Yes, I watch all of those. I'm an avid news addict, and I watch all those shows, and they have totally changed their whole tune and tone since the Iran scam. Before that, you could tell that they were programmed not to ask any embarrassing or difficult questions of the Reagan administration. And then, after Reagan committed his big faux pas, then it was open season. These news programs cater to public opinion, and they're in there for ratings. I used to like to think that they were fair-minded and really were trying to get at the truth, but it all depends on the public opinion. Public opinion turns against an administration figure, and they're on them like a pack of wolves. That's what I think.
Indiana, thanks for the call. Christopher Hitchens.
Well, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say I was a slight friend of the whiskey decanter myself, and I can't condemn people for that. I hadn't thought of Valium in that way. I actually really don't know anything at all about drugs. I've never tried any. And I don't know what Valium does except send you to sleep. I don't think it's an addiction, because I don't think you could perform at all if you were taking it. So, I mean, I think it's a slightly too speculative question at this stage to say about it. McFarland didn't give me the impression of being zonked in any way. He gave the impression of being extremely tightly wrapped and under a lot of pressure, certainly, but they're all under the pressure of having been conducting a very desperate, lying, illegal, secret government for a long time. And they must all have been praying that nothing came out, and they're now praying they can limit what does. So I think they're all screaming with pressure. As to the just say no point, I can see the joke you're trying to make. I repeat, the people they should just say no to, or say just say no to, are the Contras, their friends, their clients, the people they've done all this for, who are not drug takers, or drug dealers.
Palmdale, California. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I sort of am getting tired of that female impersonator, Jean Kirkpatrick, also. Anyway, what I would like to see in a presidential campaign is for the candidates to get up and be faced with C-SPAN callers for maybe 2 or 3 hours, something like that. I think they're lobbed nothing but easy tosses.
I think that's a great idea, caller.
I think it's a great idea, too.
Yes, and I'd like to see Reagan get in front of... He complains about the Washington press corps. I'd like to see him on C-SPAN after he recovers for an hour or two. I think that would be a really interesting thing.
Caller, who do you favor at this point? Maybe that's a little too soon, but who do you favor in this whole presidential nonsense at this time?
Well, I really can't say. Emotionally, I like Mario Cuomo. I also like Albert Gore. I think I've seen him on C-SPAN, and he comes across as thoughtful. But I'm for any Democrat.
All right, let me hold up yesterday's USA Today, and I hold it up because countdown to Iowa caucuses, and it talks about some off-year meetings that took place in Iowa this past year, and also the Des Moines Register put out one of their every once in a while their Iowa poll, and it showed as the top Democrats, Gary Hart 59% as first choice of those polled. Mario Cuomo got 14%, Bob Dole got 33% on the Republican side, and George Bush 28% on the Republican side. Any comment for that caller, Christopher Hitchens?
Not really, except I think it's a bit mean about poor old Jean Kirkpatrick. I think she looks adorable.
Atlantic City, New Jersey, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Very good, and yourself?
Very good. Just a very simple question for Mr. Hitchens. He has a great insight in some people here that I've been reading. I wonder what he thought of Sam Donaldson as a newsman.
Well, I would say Mr. Donaldson had mastered the art of asking an easy question in an aggressive manner, and that he has been for the last few years the licensed tough guy at the White House press corps. But if you ask yourself, what key question did he ask, a question which had to be answered in a yes or no way, with a proper follow-up, an interrogative follow-up, I don't think you can remember one. What you remember is that he asks them in a less apologetic way than most of the questioners do.
Any comments, caller, about any of the talk shows that you see, whether they're Sunday Morning or Crossfire, McLaughlin Group, any of the others? New Jersey is gone. Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. If you have a question or a comment, you can use those numbers. Our guest is the author of an article called Blab Scam in a recent issue of Harper's Magazine. Also writes every 2 weeks for The Nation, writing about the current sale of arms to Iran and the controversy surrounding that and the investigation. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to give us a call. When you write for The Nation, do you pick anything, just pick a subject out of the air? How do you decide what you'll write as a column for this?
Well, they let me do that, but and they're very good about letting me choose the topic. I have to think of something that will still hold up in a week, because writing for a weekly, you have quite a long lead time. So it's important either to have a different perspective, a different angle, or to be, with luck, a little bit ahead of the dailies. Can't often claim to be that.
Rupert, Idaho, go ahead, please.
Why isn't this good-looking man back in England helping Margaret Thatcher? He's a graduate of one of the best colleges.
The best college, actually.
I carry the maiden name of Thatcher. I came from England. At least my grandparents did. I'm not happy what's going on in our Washington. I think Nancy Reagan has more power over what's going on than her husband. This I feel bad about. I never voted for him. I'm not happy with what he does. I think our whole system back there is a gab scam. I wish we didn't have so many lawyers in government. They're just too smart for what is happening. Poor Mr. McFarland, as it got so tough that he has to try to take his life. I don't think the man on television knows much about medications. I wish he'd study up a little bit.
Rupert, Idaho, thanks for the call, Christopher Hitchens.
It's true I'm going to have to find out more about medication. And I think the only really bad influence Nancy Reagan has is over George Will. her lunchtime companion and confidant, who's a perfect example of the relationship I mean between power and the press, exemplified, I think, perfectly by the fact that he helped to prepare President Reagan for his debate with Jimmy Carter. He was one of the team preparing him for the debate, which we now know was done with Jimmy Carter's stolen briefing papers, and then dashes around and comes in through another door and is one of the people who reviews the performance for the waiting millions after it's over and says he thinks Reagan did terribly well. Now that's just a revolving door between certain kinds of powerful journalists and certain kinds of images of power and politicians. It's a, you know, Will is just another of those valets who are so prominent in the Washington Press Corps.
How often does George Will have lunch with Nancy Reagan?
Matter of keen speculation. He was seen having a 3.5-hour one with her the other day. I don't know whether it was just Sanka or what.
Where does one have lunch with the First
It's said
Lady?
that she only, it's somewhere out in Virginia that they go. It said she only calls him when things are tough, and this was a very long lunch, so I wouldn't even, I can't bear to think about it, actually, if you want the truth.
Daytona Beach, Florida. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, there's one thing I've always objected about the Brinkley show, and you haven't quite brought up, is their list of guests. Now, they'll have something, say, on the issue of a nuclear freeze. Who will they put on? They'll put on Henry Kissinger. There's a big new Brzezinski, supposedly one Republican and one Democrat, and they sit there and shake hands and agree with everything on aiding the Contras, on supporting Star Wars research. and it seems a habit of the Brinkley show to bring Republicans and Democrats who end up agreeing on almost every issue, and therefore when you criticize them, well, look, we had one Republican and one Democrat. And it's the same way with their panel discussions. They put on Morton Kondracki or Charles Krauthammer. Now and then they're generous and give a Tom Wicker, but that's about it. It's the same type of people, and anytime they have a defense issue, it's always Sam Nunn. It's never anybody else. It seems their guests are very limited, and they don't bring politicians or even people who are prominent with a different point of view. Say a Robert Bowman on Star Wars, or someone from the Black Caucus. You never see anybody like that on the David Brinkley show.
Daytona Beach, thanks for the call. Christopher Hitchens.
True. I mean, I guess we agree, Daytona Beach and I. It's a fearless coverage of all the issues from A to B.
Is it a self-promotion, a small self-promotion society?
Like you
among
said,
politicians as well. We started talking about journalists promoting each other, the small group that appear on the shows. Politicians doing the same thing?
Very much so. It's a club, all right, and it has all the shared unspoken assumptions. But I think I'm beginning to repeat myself if I say that.
How does one get into that club, that small club that you appear on Meet the Press, David Brinkley, Face the Name?
Would I be sitting here if I knew?
Camarillo, California. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. I feel the talk shows have reflected the icy waters into which this current reactionary administration has plunged most of us. And I appreciate, Mr. Hitchens, your having carried the Excalibur for we liberals during this time. Now, I think from now on, with the Democrats again being in more control of the Congress, we're going to see a whole lot of this house of cards come down, of which, of course, McFarlane is one example. Don't you notice Elliott Abrams, who used to be so arrogantly abrasive with Congress when he was being questioned, he now seems off balance. And isn't this healthy for the rest of us North Americanos?
Oh, Elliott Abrams is absolutely a classic example of what I mean, the sort of real power worshipper who's either at your throat or at your feet, depending on whether you're in power or not. Yes, it has been salutary to see him sort of try and put on a smarmy grin, admit, yeah, okay, he played a bit fast and loose with the truth back there, didn't quite tell the whole story. But I don't think it's over yet at all. I mean, I think that all this is really an attempt to buy time for the revelations that are yet to come about this scandal. And I think the crucial thing will have to be someone's going to have to get up and ask Reagan at one of those damn press conferences and insist on an answer. Why is it that everything he said since Poindexter resigned, every single thing he said, has turned out to be untrue? And they'll have to, and everyone in the press room should sit quiet and not push their own question until that one's been answered.
Bloomington, Indiana, go ahead,
Write your
please.
congressman.
Bloomington, Illinois, actually.
Okay. I was told Indiana, but go ahead, please, Illinois.
Well, that's okay. The airlines do it all the time. Carl, first for you. I don't think you want to be caught referring to the presidential nonsense.
I apologize for that. That slipped out. It was a major mistake on my part.
Oh, I don't find it a
Forgive
major mistake, but I think that Brian might yell at you for editorializing.
I'm sure he will.
Chris, first of all, I just want to say we miss you very much down here in Bloomington. Enjoyed your visit recently, very, very much at Wesleyan University.
Likewise.
A couple of quick questions. One, concerning Crossfire. I wonder, have you been too polite, in a sense, that yes, part of the problem is the hosts serving as referee, but part of the problem, too, I find, and this is coming from somebody who does a lot of taping of these news programs when they're on a relevant topic that I'd like to use in my teaching, part of the problem I find is just that the regulars are, frankly, not terribly bright. I remember last year, for example, the Supreme Court was about to rule in a very important libel suit that involved columnist Jack Anderson, who was to appear as a guest on the program, and I was very excited to find out that he was going to be the guest that night. Wow, I can tape this program and have a very timely bit of video to show my students before the court case came down. I was terribly disappointed because in the half hour that he was on the program, they really never got to any of the features of the court case. It was just yelling back and forth about how polite or impolite one or the other was being to Jack Anderson at the time. I was wondering about your feelings about that.
Sometimes it's true, it's extremely vulgar and generates, as they say, more heat than light on purpose, because if you sense your own case to be very weak, a cheap but short-term effective way is to try and drown out the other person. That happened to me once on Crossfire too. But there I think it's everybody's fault if the thing degenerates into a shouting match.
Tacoma, Washington, good morning. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Novak has always reminded me of a drag queen at Sunday brunch. Everything that he seems to say, whether he's on the Crossfire program,
Hope he's watching this.
McLaughlin Group, or the Insiders that he appears on, I believe, on Saturday, it's always like hot gossip. And I have also noticed that there seems to be a recycling of these so-called experts. Now, I would like for you to comment on that. And then I want to mention about President Reagan. I find him a total embarrassment. He's a president that doesn't know the difference between a tow missile and a tomahawk, as far as I'm concerned. And I can hardly wait for his 2 years to end.
Comment.
Is there a way of getting a tape of the show? I would quite like to send one to Bob Novak, since we've established, he and I, this very warm relationship. I still haven't got over your opening remark. Yeah, look, I mean, the idea of the expert is sort of a silly one, and really what you get is a pool of people who are drawn upon, who are well known for being well known. It's more a cult of celebrity than it is of expertise, and you can see that all across the media. And increasingly now there are magazines that do nothing else except write about you because you're famous, and then you get famous for being famous. Then you're photographed at every party you go to. In a sense, this is true of columnists as well. They become part of the celebrity business. As far as the president being an embarrassment is concerned, all I can tell you is this. I was in Europe recently, and I found it almost impossible to get into an argument about the president. I went to the Conservative Party conference in England. I attended some quite conservative social occasions. No one disagrees in Europe anymore about the President of the United States, I'm afraid. Everybody thinks that at the best he is a dunce, and at the worst he's a dishonest dunce. I'm not sure quite how well aware Americans are of that now. I think that many of his supporters used to think that one of his strengths was the impression he'd made of the image of America overseas. Well, if they knew what that image was now, I think they'd have to reevaluate their view of him.
Our next call is from Atlanta, and I want to hold up today's Washington Times because it has this story: Democrats pick Atlanta for convention. Ralph Howell writes a story: Democrats have chosen Atlanta as the site of their 1988 presidential convention. party sources said yesterday. Atlanta, what's your reaction to that?
I really couldn't care less, but about Crossfire, this gentleman says that it's rigged. I don't think it's rigged at all. It's one of the most widely viewed shows on television. And I saw him on Crossfire, and he was the most badly behaved person I have ever seen on Crossfire. And when he says that Tom Braden is not liberal, I mean, just because he's not as far out in the left field all the way down in Nicaragua as this man is, doesn't mean he's not liberal. I am so sick of these Reagan bashers, America bashers, and this is one of the worst kind. I don't care whether the Democratic Convention comes here or not. I'm just about through with C-SPAN. I can't tolerate any more of these American bashers. I hope that after they watch America spelled with a K, they'll, even if they won't, they're apologists for the Soviet Union. If they won't, I know they'll people will.
Christopher Hitchens.
Anyone who can say a Reagan basher and an American basher in the same breath as if they were the same thing gives themselves away, I think. That's the whole foolish trick that's been pulled and that's just been shown to be a fraud, to identify the mediocre personality of Reagan with the idea of America. Silly idea to start off with. If you think he's America, you think that America is a corrupt bargainer with hostage takers and a corrupt bargainer with drug dealers and murderers on the other hand. I don't think that is paying a compliment to America. I think you're the one who bashes America by mentioning him and it in the same breath. As for watching the series, I bet you don't get through to the end of it. It's a boring, idiotic piece of nonsensical propaganda. No one will see it all.
Have you seen
clear
seen
prophecy.
it?
Seen some of it. It's tripe. It will be a terrific anticlimax.
Santa Barbara, California, go ahead.
People are going to
please.
spend a lot of time not watching it and not talking about
Hello?
Go ahead, California, you're on the air.
Hello, Mr. Hitchens.
it. Good morning.
Morning. I certainly agree with your description of Sam Donaldson. I'm glad somebody finally brought that out. I thought he was paid to do what he was doing. They needed somebody out there to be opposing the president, and he was their man. Anyway, the question I had was, I wonder if you had any thoughts on who really runs American government. I mean, obviously the president doesn't, and all the people surrounding this man are people of the same private club, like the Council on Foreign Relations. And all through our government, the key positions, heads of all the departments, even the Tower Commission, are all of the same club investigating themselves. So I wonder if you have any information on this, or explain your view on it.
Well, I think the most important aspect of the, whatever you want to call it, the Iran-gate or Contra-gate or Iran-Nicaragua scandal, is the revelation of how much decision-taking was done in secret in this administration, and how a sort of, I don't want to sound like a paranoid here, but how a kind of invisible government was operating, a military government at that. I mean, a uniformed, secret government with very, very wide powers, with its own diplomacy, its own air force operating, as a matter of fact, I mean, south of the border and over in Iran. Its own private foreign policy involving high unelected officials, often in Israel. Its own command structure, its own chain of appointments, and operating with complete anonymity and operating really as if Congress did not exist. The key thing this secret government, invisible government, had with the legit government, key thing it had in common with it, I mean to say, is it did have the same president. I mean, certainly Reagan appointed all those people and told them to get on with it and told them what he wanted done, and I think must have said, I don't want to be told everything, and if it goes wrong, I don't want to be told at all. That doesn't mean, because he didn't know, that he isn't responsible, because he did appoint and in place that invisible government. And it's that really needs to be the subject of investigation if America's going to remain a congressional system.
Burlington, Vermont, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to compliment you on your guest, Mr. Hitchens, there, and I'd like to explore more of what he said before about the drug connection in this whole Iran-Contra deal, and specifically if you had any comments to make about Senator Kerry's efforts to investigate this area. And I was more on the line of what he was saying about the press. I was amazed to hear, it was about a week ago, a network report that ended with the tail end of a story, a comment about how one of the Iranian middlemen in this deal had tried to make a deal that he would be able to funnel funds to the Contras for a favor. the favor being that one of his friends wanted to have immunity to smuggle drugs into this country. And I was amazed that the press did not give that more play. And I would also like to compliment him on his perfect description of Mr. Novak, the king of the personal attack. And I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, I should already by now have mentioned Senator Kerry, Senator John Kerry, the junior senator from Massachusetts, who I think deserves great praise for the work he's been doing on the Contra connection, and especially on the narcotic smuggling aspect of it. I think it's a pity that he hasn't been appointed or voted on to any of the investigating committees, and I think that does show that still, as far as possible, Washington's trying to keep this an internal matter. Senator Kerry was doing that when it wasn't popular and when there were no headlines in it, and great portions of his work are going to be incorporated into some upcoming programs and publications about the question. Another thing about the invisible government, you see, was that it had its own budget, secret and separate from the national budget, but that money couldn't be raised by Congress or voted by Congress. It had to be raised in other ways, and that is where I think the high corruption has come in. It was raised on blood money, that's to say, increasing the risk of hostage-taking by trading in existing ones with obsolete weapons and black market guns, or things that had fallen off the back of the official American arsenal. And the other end of the money raising was dope, and that's how it was done. So blood, guns, and drugs as the lifeblood of the budget of an invisible government, which still has the same president as the legitimate government. Now that's a really extraordinary situation to be in, I think.
Canoga Park, California. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Good morning, Carl. Mr. Hitchens, I see you're from the Portsmouth area. Are you familiar with a little town called Waterlooville?
Yes, my grandfather lived there.
Oh, is that right?
And my uncle and aunt still do, yeah.
Oh, well, I was billeted there.
There's a very good pub there called the Heroes of Waterloo, if you may. Were you in the service?
Right, I was billeted there before the invasion. I was on the liaison detachment.
Oh, well, we were very grateful to see you all. Very nice of you to have come.
Well, I liked it there.
We're in your debt.
My parents were British. I was born here. I want to ask you a question. I just finished reading a editorial in this morning's Los Angeles Times. It was written by Mr. Peter Irons, who's a professor of political science at UC San Diego. And it's entitled "The Impeachment Question is Back." And it says it's appropriate to start asking what Reagan didn't do. And what he cites, President Reagan in his State of the Union address talks about James Madison. But what James Madison also said was that a president is impeachable if he attempts to subvert the Constitution, and also if he neglects to superintend the subordinates' conduct.
Yes.
So as to check their accesses. What are your thoughts on whether he can be impeached under these circumstances?
I must get hold of this piece in the LA Times today, obviously. Well, I've talked to constitutional lawyers about this, and they actually don't disagree as much as lawyers generally do. They say that the reading on behavior of subordinates is very clear. The president is responsible for them, even if they acted absolutely without his authority. Now, Reagan has not so far claimed that these people did not have his authority. He's implied they didn't have his authorization, which is a quite different thing. It's rather like him saying on TV in his speeches, "I take responsibility." For, in one case, the massacre of Marines in Beirut, in another case, the diversion of funds. That was in the State of the Union address. Of course he takes responsibility. He's president. He doesn't have to tell us that. That's not doing us a favor. He's responsible whether he admits it or not. The question is, what responsibility is he accepting? And that's where he won't come clean. So it's a very typical Reagan maneuver, in fact. It looks like he's apologizing, and in fact, he's evading the issue. I think that impeachment has to be up next as the question, because, as I've said, and I mustn't repeat myself too often, but it is made very clear from the memo of Mr. Bush's meeting with the Israelis on the 29th of July that nothing Reagan has said since then to the American people has been truthful, and that none of those untruths are bloopers or accidents or Reagan fluffing or Reaganisms or anything of this kind. They're lies, direct lies to Congress and to the public. In a parliamentary system, he'd have had to resign by now for lying to Parliament. because this is a country more of law, I think it will take longer. But I think you've asked the right question.
Cleveland, Ohio. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Hitchens, or since we're having a little play on names today, maybe it should be Mr. Bitchens. I noticed that you started the show off with a cheap shot on a man who's in the hospital, perhaps having taken a purposeful overdose of drugs. You took his name as a person that they try to get on shows when you could have named anyone else. This is the compassionate left that we get these cheap shots from. I noticed that Carl did not hold up a copy of USA Today today. Perhaps that's because at one time, at least I know, you were married to the White House correspondent of USA Today, and it's funny that you complain about all the non-questions from the White House press corps when your wife has been one of those ones that has asked some questions there. Why don't you feed your questions into her, and then she can ask your questions? And I think it's interesting that she doesn't wear a wedding ring, so maybe you're divorced. I want to ask you about this influx of shills for the USSR that we keep getting from Great Britain. You're one of them, and another one, another family, is this Cockburn family. That's how I pronounce it.
Cleveland, Ohio, thanks for the call. Any comment?
Yeah, well, I think the only thing that really demands a comment, because I think most of it was comment itself, was the accusation that I started with an attack on a man who's deathly ill in hospital. Didn't do that. The first time McFarlane's name was mentioned was when I was asked what I thought about the news of him taking an overdose before he was supposed to testify. Wouldn't have made a cheap shot of that kind. The rest of your comments, as far as I could see, were about as safely grounded, but I don't know.
Very quickly, are you married to a White House correspondent who works with USA Today?
No, I'm not. I'm married to a Greek Cypriot PhD student.
Las Cruces, New Mexico.
And I'm the father of an American, an American domiciled person. I should say that Alexander Coburn, to pronounce his name correctly, is a very valued and respected colleague of mine on The Nation, and it's very difficult for me to alternate with his column because I always suspect that people would rather be reading his.
Las Cruces, New Mexico. I've got about 45 seconds.
And I'm very pleased to get in this morning and very pleased to hear this program. President Reagan was selected by a group to become president and promoted to that position. If someone can ever tell me of one single solitary decision he's ever made, I'd like to know. He's an actor. He was selected on appearance and his ability to speak to the public.
Las Cruces, I'm all out of time. I'm going to have to let you go at that. Christopher Hitchens, 5 seconds.
Well, you'd have to say, even if you were his deadliest enemy, as I am, that the group of people who selected him was the American voters.
Our guest for the last hour, Christopher Hitchens, Washington correspondent with The Nation. Been with him since '81, been in Washington since '81, been with The Nation since '78. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Those
Pleasure.
of you who have been calling, we appreciate it, and have a nice day.
If you'd like more information about this or any other C-SPAN program, please write to us at 400 North Capitol Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. Our zip code is 20001.